We're going to either get COVID-19 or we're going to get a vaccine.
The effects of COVID-19 are broad and varied from case to case. While social distancing and mask mandates have proven to prevent the spread of this highly contagious virus, the pressure is on the biomedical community to develop a cure. But many in the African American community fear that trial stage vaccines pose high risks.
Well, I understand that we have reluctance about vaccines in general
because of the systemic racism that has occurred. African Americans have lost faith in our leaders.
Should we volunteer for early stage vaccines or wait for late stage results? The question is critical.
And I think that we need to be a part of the development of these vaccines.
How did a vaccine come to be so soon?
The patent that's being used in 5 of the 6 leading vaccines is mine.
Despite varying public opinions, African Americans must obtain all of the facts, advances, and processes in order to make a critical decision. Let's join Pastor Watley and an esteemed consortium of Black clergy and thought leaders to discuss how that impacts our future.
Dr. Corbett, since you're on the leading edge of this, I'm going to pitch this to you. Has the onset of the virus been identified?
The origin of this virus has been identified as, it's clearly a bat virus. It's clearly a bat virus that has been mutated. People just view it like, oh, well, they just want to increase the numbers in Black people, or they're trying to use Black people as guinea pigs. The data that comes on the other side of the trial for us informs whether or not that specific vaccine is safe and effective in that particular critical population.
The issue really is a general mistrust in our larger governmental structures because of the systemic racism that has occurred. African Americans have lost faith in our leaders, institutions that we would expect them to trust. They are walking away from. So it's a larger issue than just simply about clinical trials, which is why it's going to be important to have community leaders come to the forefront to assure them.
Back in March, I called the governor who had done a number of presentations about COVID-19, and he and others had said they were appalled at the percentage of African Americans who were being infected and dying. And I called him and said to them, why are you surprised? We are not. Because of the comorbidities and because of the health of African Americans nationwide, with this additional pandemic, who would be surprised that we'll be afflicted and affected on the level that we are? So even though we have a right as African Americans to be suspect, we don't trust these issues, the facts are this: the vaccines are going to come out. In fact, Moderna has already finished phase 3. It would be terrible, I think, that we as African Americans are not included in those trials, because we all know that there is a possibility that if we're not included, they may not be as effective in our demographics. So we'll be behind the 8 ball again.
I view the distrust kind of in 3 prongs. The first being there's this obvious historical distrust that the onus is on the government to fix, which is why we're trying to do it. And then there is the politicizing of the vaccine movement that is happening right now. And then, to be frank, a congresswoman actually had to tell me this very verbatim. She was like, no one has ever asked my constituents, my Black constituents, to actually be in a vaccine trial before. So we're actually presenting this entire movement for the first time to the Black community. So obviously there are going to be question marks about it.
I was appalled at the lack of, I thought, communication with the African American and Hispanic communities, and that we were not being involved in testing, we were not being involved in really education. And as all of you know, there were so many conspiracy issues out there and myths about it.
We have to arm people with the right information, because bad information catches like fire, but we have to make sure that this good information is spread. So trusted partners like the clergy, coming from, the bishops of Sendle, Pastor Watley, your leadership, we have to just give people the best information and keep reinforcing it.
This is a true pandemic, which means that no human being has any effective immunity against COVID-19. That's just the truth. That means all of us are vulnerable.
People were contacting me about black seed oil and, whatever, what all of what would be considered to be natural remedies for preventing a virus or preventing yourself from getting sick. But what has to be understood is that the immune system, of course, you want to keep your immune system and you want to keep your immune cells healthy. So you want to eat as best you can, as healthy as possible. Vitamin C, sure, drink your orange juice, but these things are not going to prevent your cells from being infected with a virus. The only way to train your immune system to specifically fight against being infected with the virus is to teach it. And the only way to teach your immune system to do that is by exposing it to something that's very specific so that it creates a memory, so that it remembers that, okay, I've seen this protein before. I've seen this thing before. So I better not let it get inside of the cell. And there are just no natural remedies that have that level of specificity. I started working at the NIH in 2014. So I've been there for 6 years now, and the patent that's being used in 5 of the 6 leading vaccines is mine. So, and that patent application was submitted in 2016. The manuscript describing the mutation that's encompassed in these vaccines came out in 2017. It's because we've done so much work on previous coronaviruses that it really fueled the vaccine program around this particular coronavirus. So the umbrella of vaccine development that my team works under is called pandemic preparedness. That's the entire idea. The idea is that there are 24 viral families, and at any given time, one virus from one of those 24 viral families can jump into a human and cause what we're seeing today, a deadly, devastating global pandemic. Vaccines are, in fact, the number one most effective public health intervention that we have.
We're going to either get COVID-19 or we're going to get a vaccine. Those are the two choices that I see, because we cannot stay sheltered in place indefinitely.
Howard and the other Black medical colleges decided to step forward and do this. So we have gotten together to participate in clinical trials. Meharry, Morehouse School of Medicine, and Howard are all now signed up to participate in clinical trials. When we contacted the companies, we were very clear that we wanted to participate in the science as well as the recruitment of patients.
Participation in these trials for African Americans isn't just about using us as guinea pigs. It is really about the science that comes out on the end, and whether or not we as vaccine developers can essentially, at the end of the day, trust the vaccine to be effective in Black people.
We made it very clear that we don't want to simply be bringing patients to the trials. That's not the only aspect of it. We want to participate in the full breadth of it, so that when we go to the public and say, and to our communities and say, we believe that this vaccine is safe, we can do that with clear conscience, and we can assure them based on the trust that we've had.
It's not a nice to have. It is scientifically and medically and biologically critical that we have everybody represented. So when people say diversity, it gets emotional because it automatically goes to Black or white, but it's women. Pregnant women, non-pregnant women, their physiology is different from men and the elderly. So we have to have the elderly, we have to have children, we have to have gender diversity. And we've seen the ethnic disparities, but again, they're not new, but we need to test these medications, these vaccines, these treatments in everybody.
The National Medical Association, we passed a resolution in our House of Delegates to create and establish a COVID-19 task force on vaccines and therapeutics. And this was in response to what we were seeing on the national front. We have members from the Infectious Disease Society of America, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices from the CDC. We have infectious disease specialists. We have actually state representatives for departments of health on our committee. We have a COVID-19 advisory member for the largest state in the union. We are meeting, and actually companies are contacting us. And so we're going to also engage those other companies. The signal was clear in our outreach and announcement to this nation that we want to see the data. We are advocating for enrollment of African Americans in these trials. And like many of us on this call here today, I've also registered for the trial. So we want to serve as that bridge of interpretation for the Black community.
All of us are going to have to play our role. We're going to have to educate our kids, because they are going to inherit a post-pandemic crisis of a magnitude that the African American community may not have seen before.
I called the virologist who's in charge of the trials at Northwestern and said to him, "Are you about to open phase 3? How many African Americans have you signed up?" That was 2 months ago. They had signed up 0.4% of African Americans in their phase 3 trials. And I thought that was just absurd.
On Monday, had a conversation with Dr. Anthony Fauci, convened by Reverend Jesse L. Jackson and the Rainbow Push Coalition. And so I asked him, so, well, Dr. Fauci, with monitoring and setting goals for diversity of clinical trials, what are your thoughts on what should be the desired diversity of participants in the clinical trials? And he said, well, it should be similar to that of the nation. Right. African Americans represent about 13% of the population. The Hispanic population is about 17, 18%. And so I'm hanging my hat on that. So that should be our goal.
Increasing diverse participation in clinical trials is not new. NMA has been working, Black physicians have been working to increase diversity in clinical trials for years.
I am well informed about clinical trials. What was appalling to me was that I knew about this, but I heard nothing on Black media. I heard nothing in urban America. You know, my church is a relatively large church in Chicago. I was wondering, wait, the government spent $4 billion, the pharmaceutical companies, on these vaccine developments. If African Americans and others knew the real facts and were explained to them without being paternalistic, they would join.
We have more knowledge than the general community and public. So how do we take what we know to better improve the process of finding a treatment or finding a vaccine for the virus? So I signed up probably around the end of August. I received a phone call a few weeks later from a nurse. She asked me a series of questions. I went through the series of questions. After that, she told me that the trial that they had put me in was on pause, which I'd already known. And so literally I was in a waiting period for the FDA to resume the trial. They have resumed the trial last Friday. In the interim of waiting, I was also contacted again by a nurse practitioner who then began to have a conversation. What is your commitment to participating in the trial? Why are they doing the trial? When do you need to show up? What kind of samples do they need to take from you during that process? This nurse practitioner literally went over that with me for about 20 minutes. And so for me, signing up was a great thing, but to see all the processes implemented in being a participant of the trial was was one of those things that I was excited to see, because this is a new conversation. And so my hope is that more people like myself who know about the trial, as we begin to talk more about it, as we begin to sign up and actually participate in the trial, that they will become more comfortable with doing the same. We'll start normalizing the conversation around clinical trials.
And Dr. Holt, I will be joining you. I also will be participating in the trial.
I signed up right away. I told my church, I'm gonna sign up today. That was 3 months ago.
We are fortunate to at least to know that while we did not get out of the gate properly, we need to now catch up. We also know that if we're expecting the vaccines to be ready in the first quarter of 2021, that gives us from now to then to really educate the population. I saw an article yesterday that said that if less than half the population does not take the vaccine, then we should look to be wearing masks for years to come. So it's one thing to believe something that popped up on social media or something your cousin said, but it's another thing when this has life and death impact.
It would be derelict on our part as African-American leaders not to push African-Americans to sign up for the trials. And I'm so glad that Dr. McDougall's on the line and NMA, because they're really on it. They can give us more details.
Take note of this website, www.coronaviruspreventionnetwork.org. It will take you to this web page, and you'll see here it says volunteer now. So that's what I did. And then you come to this survey that asks you questions about your health history, age, ethnicity, etc. You complete that survey, and then you get to this page, success. And there's a video at the bottom that talks about next steps.
In closing, it's my proud privilege to assemble this group and to allow them to have a part in a very instrumental conversation. And our prayer is you have greater clarity and information, and that you will help us to translate this information to others because we know that lives hang in the balance.